And of course, in the body, what happens is that when you're exercising, and we know that now suddenly for every calorie that you are burning, 20% of that goes into velocity or power, and 80% of that goes into heat. So where does the heat go? Obviously now we have a huge thermal capacity, so we can store a lot of that heat, but that will at some point become a problem because we will start to overheat, and the body will try to get rid of as much as possible of the heat. But then one of the ways to do this is exactly that the body starts to prioritize bringing blood instead into the muscles, out towards the skin and get rid of it. So this is, of course, where we need to understand how does this work, and where we had a very experimental approach to it, and we did everything from rectal probes to rectal pills to basically, which is not very invasive, because the athletes have become so used to it that it's okay, just do it. But on the other side, it's a very expensive method to approach or to use. And here now, what I knew that there was a lot of patches on the market that, of course, said, we can measure the core temperature, this kind of thing. But they do the same way as if your kid is sick or something like this, and you take the you scan the frontal lobe with the thermometers. It will give you a core temperature or temperature of your body. But the thing is that it doesn't measure it. It just takes the skin temperature.
It's not a true accurate measurement.
No, it just takes your skin temperature and applies a constant. What really intrigued me with the sensor that Core produced was that, or GreenTech produced, was that it's basically, there are two sensors in there. And that is the one that measures the skin temperature, but there also is a thermal power meter in it. So if you had made this one in metal and you put your cooking stove to 2 kilowatts and you put it on there, this won't be able to measure that, there's 2 kilowatts output now.
That's crazy.
And now suddenly we can have this on the body, and that's why there are picture out, of course, with Christian.
So it literally tells you how much energy your body's producing and
directly
the temperature piece.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
So this is now, let's say...
Is that Bluetooth to the Garmin?
Yeah. No, actually ANT+, but also Bluetooth, straight into the Garmin, so you can have it there. So you actually have both now, mechanical power and thermal power, looking at it.
That's freaking crazy.
Yeah. So what we also then want to optimize is basically how can we take those calories, those limited calories that we actually can turn into work per minute, per second, per minute, per hour. How can we optimize that? Because, again, calories are the limit. How can we now increase the ratio between the thermal part and the mechanical part?
From an evolutionary perspective, that ratio sounds crazy.
Yeah.
That only 20% goes into actual, what would you call it? Like energy output, 80% to heat management. It doesn't seem right. Like how did humans survive?
Yeah.
It's so inefficient.
Yeah. But probably that was also one of the keys when you...
A very warm welcome to another video. So that was some footage from a recent Rich Roll podcast just 2 days ago with Olav Alexander, who is the coach of both Christian Blumenfeld and Gustav Iden, the Norwegian triathletes who, have absolutely come onto the scene in Ironman triathlon, 70.3 Ironman, and just absolutely dominated it in many races. Gustav winning the Ironman World Champs, Christian winning that as well, for the 2021 version, also taking out the 70.3 World Championship, and just being overall, step above the rest. So one of the things that Olav talks of there is the I guess percentage in which the body donates towards or puts towards actual exertion or mechanical force when training and racing, and also towards heat production. And one of the consequences of increasing heat production is that, unfortunately, the mechanisms in which we use to dissipate that heat, because becoming too hot internally is very problematic from a physiological level, the mechanisms that we use to dissipate that heat are negatively impactful for our actual performance in terms of the watts we can do on the bike, the speed we can run at, and then swimming's not so much of an issue unless it's in really warm water temperatures. So what are those effects? Well, we're going to redistribute our blood flow from our working muscles and our core to our surface or our skin. So we have peripheral vasodilation that allows that, and the skin gets close to the surface. This allows for an exchange of, when we have sweating, and evaporation of that sweating. And this allows for the blood, which is actually close to the level of the surface or the skin surface, have that cooling effect that's induced by sweating and also just generally being close to the surface overall. And that's one of the main mechanisms as to how we actually cool down. So the consequence is that we're actually redistributing or redirecting blood flow away from the working muscles. And therefore, when we have that going on, we have less oxygen going to the muscles and we have less, obviously, blood, and therefore oxygen being able to be used for force production or output. So that's going to negatively affect performance. And also realize too that any time in which you have even a degree elevation in your core body temperature, you will certainly feel the effects of that. And then getting into these stages of heat exhaustion or heat stroke even, that's going to be, one, negatively impactful for your performance and your race outcomes, but two, as well, an extremely dangerous situation for yourself medically and your health overall. So it's not something you want to do, it's something you want to avoid. And so if you're someone who struggles in the heat, or even if you just don't struggle in the heat, but you know that you otherwise sweat a lot, your power kind of drops a little bit towards the end of a workout or a race in the heat, this may be something to be, of, I guess, interest for you guys. And when we think about, obviously, and one more thing is that we have the dehydration effect as well. So the whole process of sweating, cooling the blood, etc., leads to dehydration because we're reducing the blood plasma volume levels, and therefore obviously losing total body fluid, and the blood is going to be becoming thicker, and obviously that's going to lead to a reduction in our efficiency and overall work output that we can do. So generally, let's just talk through this information on the left. So environmental factors that impact how well you can tolerate the heat include obviously how hard you're working, your clothing choice. So you can choose both of those or dictate both of those. Clothing is a big one. Can you find a triathlon suit or a racing suit that can otherwise be better, at dissipating heat and trapping, or not trapping, but allowing sweat to stay on that for longer and therefore having that better effective cooling via evaporation? Insufficient shade during activity, lack of access to water, of course, ambient air temperatures and humidity. So you can't control the air temperature, you can't control the humidity, you can't control the duration generally, and you can't control your access to water. Well, you can, kind of, particularly in a race situation. But they're the environmental factors. The internal factors are actually quite interesting as well, and they include age. So people under the age of 15 or over the age of 65 are more susceptible to heat illness and have a reduced capacity to actually dissipate heat. Recent alcohol consumption will significantly reduce your ability to tolerate the heat. So that's important to note. Acute or chronic dehydration, of course. History of heat-related medical illness. So if it's happened to you in the past, obviously genetic factors, familial inheritance of, how well you can dissipate heat. That's going to likely happen, or you'll be more susceptible to that, of course. Medication or supplement interactions. We know many of the SSRI medications or the antidepressants can cause the body to overheat quicker. Recent illness that include fever, of course, fever raising body temperature, reduced capacity to deal with heat. And this is very interesting, recent head injury. So if you've had a traumatic brain injury or even a mild traumatic brain injury, which is otherwise a concussion is otherwise classified as a mild traumatic brain injury, you are going to be more susceptible or potentially more susceptible to heat illness and have a reduced capacity to regulate your internal body temperature. And now this all comes down to the effect of the head injury and the inflammation in the brain and how well the hypothalamus, which is what really monitors our temperature, how well the hypothalamus can actually, I guess, or how efficiently it works or whatnot, but the whole bunch of processes that, many scientists don't even know, that essentially mean that if you have suffered a concussion and you do have some lingering inflammation in that brain, your capacity to deal with heat will be reduced, likely, or it can be. So not always, but it certainly can be. So that's one thing to, if you're recovering from concussion, certainly do not be going out in extreme heat and pushing yourself at the levels that you otherwise were prior to a concussion, because at one, that's going to negatively affect your concussion recovery, and two, you won't be able to do it as well, unfortunately. So we have recent head injury, sunburn, of course, skin conditions, eczema and psoriasis, unfortunately, and then obviously insufficient heat acclimatization. So what are the three main things that you can do to improve your capacity to deal with heat? One, heat acclimatization. So spending time in the heat, training, generally gradually building up in duration and intensity in hot environments are going to allow you to become more efficient at dissipating heat, start sweating quicker, which of course can lead to faster dehydration, but it's going to allow you to more early in your activity start that process of heat dissipation and internal body temperature regulation. So heat acclimatization is number one. Never underestimate the power of that. And if you're doing like Kona World Championships, for example, and then you're coming from a cold environment and you've spent 6 months training in the cold and then going to Kona, certainly try and include some heat acclimatization or adaptation in your training if possible. 2, hydration. Never underestimate the power of hydration. When we become dehydrated, we have less capacity to sweat, and that's in the extreme states. But obviously, that's going to, significantly reduce our ability to cool down, because sweating is the main way in which we are going to regulate that body temperature during exercise. So hydration levels are super important. Even small percentages of dehydration negatively affect your performance. So never underestimate that, and make sure you're dialed in on your hydration strategy. And then 3, cooling practices. So this was quite interesting, and there was some speculation about these little, what were they? Whether they were bottles or whether they were specific, aerodynamic, I guess, what was the term that we use? I can't even think of what they were called, but the little things that these guys had down the front of their shirt on the bike in Kona, and everyone was kind of like, what are they? Were they just simple water bottles and they were using them down the shirt because that's more aerodynamic? Or was it like a cooling pack? Or was it just an aerodynamic, tool to go faster? But essentially, if you can cool the body in each of the disciplines, particularly in the bike and run, it's going to, improve your performance. And we know that obviously on the bike, you can put something down the chest, and the chest is hitting some wind, so that's going to enhance cooling. Putting things on the back of the neck, like a cold flannel that's been dipped in ice, that's going to improve cooling. We saw Patrick Langer using the sponges down his suit to put down his suit and all around his suit when he won Kona a few years back. That's going to improve cooling. So really dialing in on your cooling practices. And if you're someone who's otherwise just finds it really tough to deal with the heat and training and racing in the heat, do some of these things in training and see how they work, and then do your best to try and replicate those in the race if they're working for you. So again, whether it's putting water over the body, whether it's putting ice down the suit, whether it's putting ice packs around the body or sponges around the body, wearing a hat, having a lighter colored suit, because we know the darker colors are going to absorb more temperature. So wearing something that's closer to white than closer to black, wearing a hat, obviously, and all these things. So there are many things that you can do in terms of the practices for cooling actually on the day. So never underestimate that as well. And generally just realize that heat stroke is a medical condition that's dangerous to your health, but generally overheating in terms of your performance is also going to significantly reduce your performance, even if it doesn't feel like it is at the time. It's going to be harder. You're going to have less blood going to the muscles, and it's going to overall reduce your capacity to put out power, to function at the highest level possible when you're running, swimming, and riding. So hopefully that was, an interesting clip from the Rich Roll podcast. I'll link the whole thing because I've watched the whole thing, and certainly, great insight into the training of the Norwegians, the philosophy, the culture, the focus on the actual data and the science, and how he takes much of that load rather than the athletes, and they just go out and do the work. I feel like everyone would be super interested and take a lot away from that, that whole podcast. But nonetheless, take care, guys. Hopefully you found that little subsection of interest and use. Post any questions below regarding cooling practices, etc. And take care. Hope everyone enjoyed that, and I'll see you all in the next video.